you know, you think of a guy like that, you think of a wrestler, but this guy, although he is absolutely a good grappler, his kicks are fucking insane.
And he can wrestle too, huh?
He can wrestle too. But he's, as a striker, is where he really shines. He throws nasty kicks to the body. Just a really good striker. Tough as fuck. And undefeated. But he's a guy that's like not getting a lot of hype for whatever reason, but I think he's someone to keep an eye on.
It's the first time I've ever saw him, yeah.
Remember the name, Shavkat Rakhmonov!
Being a good fighter isn't always enough to get your name out there. No, sometimes the raw talent needs to be backed up with some luck, some finesse, something well-timed that can really put your name on the map. And coming into UFC 285, it was clear that Shavkat Rakhmonov had already done everything in his power to make a good account of himself. 16 fights had produced a whopping 16 finishes, a clean 100% stoppage record. And ever since he first touched down in the UFC, it was clear that this Kazakhstan-based contender had something special. But after featuring on a main card that was headlined by Jon Jones, a card that was rumored to have produced between 600 and 800,000 pay-per-view buys, Shavkat Rakhmonov finally had the stage to showcase exactly why people think he's the future of the welterweight division. Or at the very least, why Khamzat Chimaev has some real competition in that role. But let's take a step back for a moment and dive into why people were so high on Shavkat before this fight. Born in Uzbekistan, Shavkat eventually received citizenship of Kazakhstan and began his martial arts journey, turning pro just before his 20th birthday with a triangle choke submission in the first round. But Rakhmonov, even at this early stage, was not limiting himself as a fighter in terms of his chosen style. His next 2 victories would come by first-round knockout, before he then scored 4 submissions in 5 victories to move to a clean 8-0. At this point, you could see him developing into a potent submission threat. But just in case anyone wanted to put a label on him, Shavkat scored 4 straight knockouts just to balance the books. In this time, he captured and successfully defended the M1 Welterweight Championship, attracting some global attention in the process. The first 12 fights of Rakhmonov's career were just about as destructive as you could ever hope for. And sure enough, it didn't take long for the UFC to get very interested in this guy. In fact, Dana White and his team were so convinced that Shavkat was for real that they matched him up with some formidable opposition straight away. Shavkat made his UFC debut against the 33-fight veteran Alex "Cowboy" Oliveira, a major step up in competition compared to the guys he had fought on the regional scene. But watching this fight, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Shavkat was right at home. And before the first round was through, Rakhmonov had scored the biggest win of his career to date. A deft guillotine sub over a highly experienced opponent. As far as debuts go, this was an incredibly impressive showing. A performance that proved that this Kazakh prospect was ready for yet another step up. And though his fight with Michel Prazeres was more of a step sideways than a real boost in opposition, Rakhmonov did not disappoint, nailing his opponent with a spinning wheel kick before catching him with a perfectly timed intercepting knee. Before Prazeres had time to clear the cobwebs, Shavkat was on him, locking in the rear naked choke for the second round finish. And once fight number 3 came around, Rakhmonov had gotten the full attention of the hardcore fanbase. This time, Carlston Harris was his opponent, a guy on a 5-fight win streak seen by some as a strong prospect in his own right. Well, Shavkat didn't take long to get his reads, nailing him with 2 spin kicks, first to the body and then to the head, knocking him down before scoring the TKO. It was another first-round finish and his 14th consecutive career stoppage. The UFC finally decided to push Shavkat into the rankings next, setting him up for a clash with the highly underrated Neil Magny, who was ranked number 10 at the time. And boy did Rakhmonov rise to the occasion. A dominant effort followed, as he cut through Magny in a way that no one does, showcasing every part of his game, ground and pounding Magny, controlling him with ease, and eventually locking up yet another guillotine submission. But it would be his most recent fight against the highly touted Geoff Neal where we would finally see this man come into his own as a legitimate top 10 fighter. Neil is a credentialed threat in there, a guy who has shared the cage with some of the finest welterweights in the game. Stephen Thompson, Neil Magny, Santiago Ponzinibbio, and more. But Shavkat knew that the eyes of the world were on him, and though his usual methodical style did not make an appearance, we got something far more exciting instead. Rakhmonov walked the hard-handed Geoff Neal down for the whole fight, putting himself in danger more than he had ever done before. But Shavkat was in there to put on a show for the fans, and it goes without saying that he did just that. Despite getting tagged and hurt by Neal due to his recklessness, Shavkat was pretty comfortably heading towards a decision win when the third round entered its final minute. But after scoring 16 straight finishes, just winning wouldn't be enough. No, Shavkat had one more trick up his sleeve for those final exchanges. And after hurting Neal with a stiff right hand, he went to work in the clinch with his knees and elbows, eventually opening up the opportunity to score a fight-ending, standing rear naked choke that seemed to have elements of a bulldog choke in there. It was his greatest victory to date, and again, what a stage to do it on. Now, the official UFC promo entitled "The Rise of Shavkat Rakhmonov" has over 1 million views on YouTube, which, look, isn't the only metric you can use to define public acknowledgement of a fighter, but it's a pretty damn good start. In terms of making a statement under the bright lights, yes, we saw Shavkat take a few more shots than usual, and he was most certainly forced to rely on his granite chin. But with all those fans in attendance, and the hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions watching around the world, Rakhmonov showed himself to be more than capable of digging out victory in a truly violent contest. If it was your first time watching him in action, or if perhaps the nuances and subtleties of MMA aren't yet obvious to you, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this guy is like a welterweight answer to Justin Gaethje or Charles Oliveira, a fighter who relishes chaos. Well, although that is true to some extent, don't lose sight of the fact that he's also a very technical fighter. It's kind of crazy to notice that Shavkat isn't really a fast starter. No, he begins his fight slowly and waits for his opponents to give him openings, making him something more like a combat supercomputer than anything else. And though he's not a wild man, his record of consecutive finishes, which now stands at 17 straight, speaks for itself. 8 knockouts and 9 submissions is a pretty even split. But you'll notice how he uses his wrestling to set up ground and pound, just as he uses big moments on the feet to drop and eventually submit his opponents. He's a complete fighter, a fan-friendly fighter, and looking up the rankings, you kinda have to give the man his top 5 test before too long. This is a very special prospect, folks, and while sure, Khamzat Chimaev deserves to be the one with all of the heat, Shavkat Rakhmonov is right there, ready to make yet another major splash next time he makes that walk. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to click the bell to be notified of future videos.